The rain had stopped over Charleston sometime after midnight, but the air still held on to it, thick and warm and smelling of salt and jasmine, when Andrew Montgomery pulled his car up outside the little gallery on King Street and saw her through the glass, laughing at something a stranger had said about one of her paintings. He had met Claire Bennett 4 months earlier, at an art walk he'd only gone to because a friend from his firm had dragged him along, complaining the whole way about how he'd rather be home watching baseball. He remembered the exact moment he'd stopped listening to his friend's complaints. It was the moment Claire had turned around, paint still faintly visible under one thumbnail, and told him without any preamble that the piece he was staring at was actually her least favorite thing she'd ever made. "Then why is it hanging?" he'd asked. "Because sometimes you have to let people see the thing you're embarrassed by," she'd said. "Otherwise you start believing your own highlight reel." He had thought about that sentence for a week afterward. He was still thinking about it 4 months later as he walked into the gallery and watched her spot him over the shoulder of the stranger she'd been talking to. Her whole face changed. Not dramatically, she didn't throw her arms up or call his name across the room, but something in her eyes softened and focused, like she'd been waiting for exactly this and hadn't wanted to admit it. "You're late," she said when he reached her. "I brought a bribe." He held up a small paper bag from the bakery 2 doors down, the one that sold the burnt sugar tarts she pretended not to love. "That's not a bribe, that's blackmail. Now I have to forgive you." She took the bag anyway, peeking inside, and something about the simple domestic honesty of the gesture made his chest ache in a way he still wasn't fully used to. They left together an hour later, her arm looped through his, walking slowly because neither of them wanted the night to end. Charleston at that hour was quiet and beautiful, the old iron gas lamps throwing gold light over the cobblestones, and when they reached the seawall along the Battery, Claire stopped and looked out at the black water and the lights of the ships far out in the harbor. "I used to come here after my parents' divorce," she said. "I'd sit right there," she pointed to a bench half swallowed in shadow, "and just watch the water and tell myself that somewhere out past all that dark things were calmer. I don't even know if that's true, but it helped to believe it." Andrew came to stand beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. "Is that why you never talk about your family?" "I don't not talk about them, I just don't lead with it." She glanced sideways at him, a small, wry smile. "You, on the other hand, have mentioned your mother's Sunday dinners approximately 400 times. They're a big deal in my family. My dad built our dining table by hand the year I was born. Cypress wood took him 8 months. My mom still lights the same candles every week. She says a table like that deserves ceremony." He hesitated, feeling suddenly nervous in a way that surprised him. "I want you to meet them. Properly, I mean. Not a hallway introduction at some fundraiser. I want you at that table." Claire was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice had dropped into something more careful. "You say that like it's simple." "It is simple. I love you. I want the people who made me to know the person who's making me happier than I've been in years." He turned her gently by the shoulders so she was facing him. "Claire, I'm not going anywhere. I want you to stop bracing for the moment I disappear." She studied his face for a long moment, searching it the way she searched a canvas before deciding where the first stroke would go. And then she rose onto her toes and kissed him, soft and unhurried, the kind of kiss that didn't need an audience to mean everything it meant. "Okay," she whispered against his mouth, "Sunday dinner." Neither of them could have known, standing there with the harbor lights scattered like fallen stars across the water, that this simple word, *OK, would set into motion everything that followed. The Montgomery house sat at the end of a long oak-lined drive outside the city, a rambling white 2-story with wraparound porches that Daniel Montgomery had renovated himself over the course of a decade, room by room, the way some men rebuild a car. He was 54 years old, an architect whose firm had designed half the boutique hotels along the coast, a man people described, often within the first 5 minutes of meeting him, as *magnetic*. He had a way of looking at you when you spoke that made you feel like the only interesting person in the room, a habit that had served him well in business, and if he was honest with himself in the quiet hours he rarely allowed himself, had also made him restless in ways he didn't examine too closely. Rebecca Montgomery, 51, moved through the kitchen that Sunday with the practiced choreography of a woman who had hosted this exact dinner nearly every week for 29 years. She was tall, silver threading gracefully through dark hair she still wore long, and she had a stillness about her that balanced her husband's restless energy, the kind of quiet confidence that came from having built a life she was proud of and having no need to prove it to anyone. "He says her name like it's a secret he's been keeping too long," Rebecca said, setting the cypress table with the same white candles she always used, tall and unscented so they wouldn't compete with the food. "Did you hear him on the phone this morning?" "I heard him," Daniel said, coming up behind her and pressing a kiss to her temple. "Our boy's in love. About time. I was starting to worry he'd inherited my inability to commit to anything before the age of 30. You committed to me at 23. You were an emergency exception." He smiled against her hair. "Some people you don't get to think twice about." The doorbell rang at 6, and Andrew came in first, practically vibrating with a nervous energy Rebecca hadn't seen in him since his first day of college. And then Claire stepped through the door behind him, and the room seemed to hold its breath for just a moment, the particular hush that happens when a family gets its first look at the person who might become part of it. Claire was lovely in an unstudied way, dark hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a green dress that made Rebecca think, absurdly, of new leaves in spring. But it was her eyes that caught the room, an unusual pale gray, striking against her coloring, and full of an alert, watchful warmth, as though she were memorizing everyone's face for later. "Mrs. Montgomery." Claire's handshake was warm and firm. Andrew wasn't lying about the candles. Rebecca laughed, pulling her into a hug instead. "Call me Rebecca, and you'll learn quickly that Andrew doesn't lie about the things that matter to him. It's the things that don't matter he's terrible at explaining." "Hey," Andrew protested, but he was grinning. Then Daniel stepped forward, and something happened that no one in the room quite registered as significant in that moment. A beat too long before he extended his hand, a flicker of something crossing his face as he took in the whole of her, the way an architect takes in a building he's about to walk through for the first time, cataloging lines and light before he can stop himself. "Claire Bennett," he said, and his voice had dropped into a register that was, if anyone had been listening for it, subtly different from the one he used with everyone else. "Andrew's told us a great deal. None of it, I have to say, prepared me." "Good things, I hope," Claire said, and there was something in the way she held his gaze, a half-second longer than a stranger's handshake usually calls for, that she herself didn't fully understand until much later, lying awake, trying to explain it to no one. "The best things," Daniel said. "Welcome to our table." Dinner unfolded easily after that. Claire was funny in the dry, understated way that made people lean in to catch her jokes, and she asked Rebecca real questions about her garden, and she listened, actually listened, when Daniel talked about the old churches he'd restored early in his career, the ones that had made his name before the hotels came along. Andrew watched the whole scene with the particular happiness of a man seeing his two favorite worlds merge without friction, and if he noticed that his father laughed a little too readily at Claire's jokes, or that his mother's eyes moved between her husband and their guest once or twice with a flicker of something unnamed, he attributed it to nothing more than a good night among people who liked each other. "She's wonderful," Rebecca told him privately in the kitchen, wrapping leftovers while Andrew helped Claire find her jacket. "Truly, hold on to that one." "I plan to," Andrew said. Behind them, out on the porch where he'd stepped for air, Daniel Montgomery stood alone for a moment in the dark, looking out at the oaks, feeling something he hadn't let himself feel in years and did not, that night, have a name for. The seasons turned, and the Montgomerys folded Claire into their rhythms the way families do, not all at once, but in small accumulating certainties. She was there for Rebecca's birthday in October, helping string lights along the porch railing while Daniel grilled, and told the same 3 stories he always told, the ones everyone had heard a dozen times and still laughed at because of how he told them, not what he said. She was there for the Montgomery family's annual Thanksgiving, elbow-deep in flour beside Rebecca, learning the secret of her mother-in-law-to-be's biscuits, while Andrew and Daniel argued good-naturedly over football in the next room. It was easy, that was the strange, quiet danger of it. Claire had spent so much of her adult life keeping people at arm's length, protecting herself from the kind of disappointment her own fractured childhood had taught her to expect. And here was a family that simply let her in asterisk, no conditions attached, and Daniel Montgomery, more than anyone, seemed to understand exactly the parts of her that needed understanding. It started small enough that neither of them could have pointed to a single moment and called it the beginning. At the beach house in March, during the family's annual spring trip, Claire had wandered out onto the deck before sunrise, unable to sleep, and found Daniel already there with 2 mugs of coffee, as if he'd known she'd come. "Andrew sleeps like a stone," he said, handing her one. "Always has. You could set off fireworks in that room." "It's one of the things I love about him," Claire said, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "He's steady, nothing rattles him." "That's his mother in him." Daniel looked out at the water, gray-pink in the early light. "I was never steady like that. Rebecca's the anchor in our house. I'm the one who keeps threatening to drift." "Do you drift?" He was quiet for a moment, longer than the question seemed to require. "I used to think restlessness was just part of being a builder. You're always looking at what's next, what could be better, what you'd do differently if you got another chance at it. It's useful in the job." He glanced at her, and there was something unguarded in his face that she hadn't seen before, not in all the family dinners, not in all the easy jokes. "It's less useful in a life." Claire didn't answer right away. The sun was cresting the horizon now, spilling gold across the water, and something about the light and the early hour and the honesty in his voice made the moment feel suspended, outside the ordinary rules of a Tuesday morning between a woman and her boyfriend's father. "I think everyone feels that sometimes," she finally said, wondering about the road not taken. "Do you?" "More than I'd like to admit." She looked down at her coffee. "I think that's why Andrew's steadiness matters so much to me. I don't trust my own wondering." Daniel nodded slowly, like she'd said something important, something he intended to think about later. "That's a wise way to protect yourself." They stood there a while longer, not talking, the ocean filling the silence. And when Andrew wandered out 20 minutes later, rumpled and smiling, asking what they'd been up to, they both said, almost too quickly, just watching the sunrise, and let the conversation move on. It became a pattern, that spring and into summer, small moments that meant nothing on their own. Daniel's hand steadying her elbow when she stumbled on the porch steps, lingering half a second longer than balance required. A conversation at Andrew's birthday party that stretched on after everyone else had drifted toward the cake, about a book Claire was reading that Daniel, to her surprise, had already finished. The particular attentiveness with which he asked about her art, not the polite, glancing interest most people offered, but real questions, the kind that made her feel seen in a way that unsettled her more than she wanted to acknowledge. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself Daniel was simply a warm man who made everyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. Andrew had said as much, fondly, more than once. She told herself the flutter she sometimes felt when he looked at her a certain way was leftover nerves from wanting his family's approval, nothing more. Daniel told himself similar things, that he was simply glad his son had found someone substantial, that his attentiveness was fatherly, that the thing coiling quietly in his chest whenever Claire laughed at something he said was pride, nothing else, pride in Andrew's choice. Neither of them examined those explanations too closely. Both of them, in the small hours when sleep wouldn't come, suspected they weren't entirely true. By August, the guilt had become its own quiet, private weather system, hovering over each of them separately, never spoken aloud, never acted upon, and yet never quite dispersing either. The night everything changed began ordinarily enough. Andrew had flown to Atlanta for a 2-day work conference, the kind of trip he took 4 or 5 times a year without a second thought, and Claire had come to the Montgomery house that Friday evening anyway, because Rebecca had asked her to help pick out paint samples for the guest room, and Claire, who loved few things more than a good color conversation, had happily agreed. Except Rebecca, it turned out, had been called away at the last minute. Her sister in Savannah had fallen and needed a ride to urgent care, nothing serious, but Rebecca had left in a hurry just after 5, apologizing to Claire by text and promising to reschedule. "Looks like it's just us," Daniel said, coming out onto the porch where Claire sat with the abandoned paint swatches fanned across the table, the last light of evening turning everything amber. "I could drive you home, if you'd rather not stick around an empty house with the old man." "You're not old," Claire said, and immediately regretted how easily the words came out, how much warmth was in them. "Tell that to my knees." He sat down across from her anyway, not making a move to leave, and for a while they talked about nothing important: the paint colors, a building he was restoring downtown, a documentary she'd watched that he was curious about. It was comfortable. It was, she would later try to explain to herself, exactly the kind of comfortable that should have made her more careful, not less. The sun went down. Neither of them turned on the porch lights. At some point the conversation drifted somewhere it hadn't gone before, into the marriage Daniel didn't often examine out loud, the good, solid, 29-year foundation of it, and also the parts he didn't say to Rebecca anymore, because he wasn't sure how to without sounding ungrateful for a life that, by every reasonable measure, was a good one. "I don't think I've ever told anyone that," he admitted, staring at his hands. "Rebecca deserves a husband who doesn't feel unfinished. I don't know how to be anything else some days." "Maybe unfinished isn't the same as unhappy," Claire said quietly. "Maybe it just means you're still capable of wanting things. That doesn't sound like a flaw to me." He looked up at her then, and the dark had fully settled around them, and something in his face in that low light was so raw, so unguarded, that it undid something in her she'd spent months carefully holding together. "You see people clearly," he said. "It's disarming." "So do you," she whispered. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The crickets filled the silence between them, insistent and unbothered, indifferent to the quiet unraveling happening at that table. And then Daniel reached over slowly, as if giving her every chance to stop him, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers grazing her cheek, and Claire, who had spent 4 months telling herself this feeling was nothing, closed the last inch of distance between them. The kiss was soft and searching, and it lasted only a few seconds before they both pulled back at once, as though the same jolt of horror had struck them simultaneously. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh God, I have to go." "Claire." No, she was already on her feet, gathering her bag with shaking hands. This didn't happen. It can't have happened. But it had, and as she drove home through the dark, hands trembling on the wheel, she understood with a sick, sinking certainty that whatever door had just opened between her and Daniel Montgomery was not going to close simply because she wanted it to. It should have ended there. Both of them, separately in the days that followed, told themselves it would end there, a single, terrible lapse born of an empty house and low light and honesty that had gone somewhere it shouldn't have. Claire threw herself into Andrew when he returned from Atlanta, meeting him at the airport with an intensity that surprised him, holding him a beat too long, as though she could love her way back to solid ground. For nearly 3 weeks it seemed to work, and then Rebecca hosted her annual charity gala at the end of September. The whole extended family gathered at the old hotel downtown that Daniel had restored, and across a crowded ballroom, over the heads of 200 guests, Claire's eyes found Daniel's, and his found hers, and neither of them could look away fast enough. They didn't speak that night. They didn't need to. The current between them had reestablished itself in a single glance, and both of them went home carrying the knowledge that this was not, in fact, over. What followed was a season neither of them was ever fully able to explain afterward, even to themselves. It was not one long continuous choice, but 100 small ones. A text that shouldn't have been sent, answered anyway. A coincidence engineered to look accidental. A hand resting a half-second too long on a waist while helping someone into a coat. They met on Tuesday afternoons when Daniel claimed site visits that didn't exist, in a quiet corner booth of a restaurant 2 towns over where no one would recognize them. And they talked. For a long time, it was only talking. The kind of talking that feels more dangerous than anything physical, because it strips you bare in ways a touch never could. "I keep thinking if I just stop answering, it'll go away," Claire told him one gray October afternoon, her coffee going cold in front of her. "But then you text, and I answer in about 4 seconds, and I hate myself, and I do it again the next time anyway." "I know," Daniel's voice was low, rough with the same exhaustion she felt. "I've built things my whole life. I know how to walk away from a bad foundation. I don't know how to walk away from this." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and she let him, watching their hands together as though they belonged to two other people entirely. The physical distance between them collapsed slowly, and then all at once, a lingering embrace in a parking garage that lasted a full minute too long. His palm resting against the small of her back as they said goodbye, sliding up between her shoulder blades in a slow, aching drag that neither of them could pretend was accidental. Her hand flat against his chest one evening, feeling his heartbeat hammering beneath her fingers, feeling her own heart answer it. There was a night in November, the details of which neither of them ever spoke of afterward, even to each other, when the last of their resistance simply gave out, when two people who had spent months telling themselves not this, not us, never again found themselves instead wrapped in a silence that said everything their words had been too afraid to. The night quietly folded around them, and for a little while the world outside, the wife 30 miles away lighting her ceremonial candles alone, the son texting "miss you, call me when you're free" into a phone Claire couldn't bring herself to answer, simply ceased to exist. There was only the terrible, beautiful quiet of two people who knew exactly what they were doing and had run out of the will to stop. Afterward, in the dark, Claire wept without quite understanding why, and Daniel held her and said nothing, because there was nothing honest left to say. Andrew noticed the changes the way you notice weather shifting, not all at once, but in small, accumulating signs that eventually add up to a storm you should have seen coming. Claire had grown quieter over the winter. She still laughed at his jokes, still curled into him on the couch on Sunday nights, still said "I love you" with what seemed like the same conviction as always. And yet there was a distance in her now, a way her eyes sometimes drifted somewhere far off in the middle of a sentence, as though half of her had checked out of the room without telling the other half. "You okay?" he'd ask, and she'd blink back into focus and smile and say, "Just tired. Big project," and he believed her because why wouldn't he? His father, too, had changed in ways Andrew couldn't quite name. Daniel had always been an energetic presence at family dinners, holding court, telling his stories. But that winter he'd started arriving late to things, or leaving early, citing site visits that ran long. He was distracted in a way that didn't suit him, and once, at a birthday dinner for Andrew's cousin, Andrew caught his father checking his phone under the table 3 times in 20 minutes, jaw tight each time, before catching Andrew watching him and quickly pocketing it. The first real crack of suspicion came in February, small and specific and impossible to fully dismiss. Andrew had borrowed Claire's car to run an errand while his was in the shop, and a receipt had fluttered out of the glove compartment, a restaurant 2 towns over, a place he'd never heard her mention, dated for a Tuesday afternoon when she told him she was at a client meeting. He almost didn't think anything of it. Almost. He didn't say anything to her. Not yet. But he started noticing things he hadn't let himself notice before, the way she sometimes flinched, almost imperceptibly, when his father's name came up in conversation. The way, at the last family dinner, she and Daniel had seemed to be working very hard not to look at each other, an absence of eye contact so deliberate it felt louder than if they'd been staring. He told himself he was being paranoid. He told himself grief and imagination were doing the same work, building a story out of nothing but coincidence and exhaustion. But some quiet animal part of him had already begun to understand, in the place beneath conscious thought where the body knows things before the mind will admit them, that something in his life had gone terribly wrong, and that it was closer to home than he wanted to believe. Rebecca Montgomery had not built a 29-year marriage and a life she was proud of by being careless, and once suspicion took root in her, it did not stay vague for long. It had started with something almost absurdly small, Daniel's cologne, a bottle he'd worn faithfully for a decade, replaced without explanation for something unfamiliar, something she noticed on his collar after a site visit that had run 4 hours longer than any site visit reasonably should. A woman who has shared a bed with the same man for 3 decades develops an instinct for the shape of his lies, even before she has evidence to justify the suspicion, and Rebecca's instinct, once it woke, refused to go back to sleep. She did not confront him. She had learned, over a lifetime of watching other marriages implode in dramatic, premature accusations that later proved half-true and irreparable anyway, that suspicion without proof only hands your opponent the ability to gaslight you into doubting your own eyes. So instead, quietly, methodically, over the course of 6 weeks, Rebecca Montgomery became a detective in her own home. She noted the dates of his supposed site visits and cross-referenced them discreetly with his actual project calendar at the firm, discovering 3 visits to properties that had been sold or completed months earlier. She found, tucked deep in a drawer he rarely used, a hotel receipt from a small inn 2 towns over, dated for an afternoon she remembered clearly because it was the day of her sister's birthday lunch, a lunch Daniel had begged off, citing work. She began, with a steadiness that cost her more than anyone would ever know, to photograph what she found, to save what she could, to build carefully, painfully, a record. The final piece came almost by accident. She was retrieving a forgotten umbrella from Claire's car one rainy afternoon, at Claire's own distracted invitation, and a phone left unlocked on the passenger seat lit up with a message that made the umbrella slip from Rebecca's hand entirely. She stood in the rain outside her son's girlfriend's car for a long, silent minute, reading a string of messages that stripped away every remaining doubt she had allowed herself to keep. She did not cry, not then. She photographed the screen with her own phone, hands steady in a way that frightened her a little, and then she put the umbrella back exactly where she'd found it and walked inside and smiled and thanked Claire for the coffee, because there was one more piece she needed before she was ready. She needed everyone in the same room together when the truth finally came out, not for cruelty's sake. Because she understood, with the clarity of a woman who had spent a lifetime managing other people's feelings before her own, that a truth this large deserved to land only once, cleanly, in front of everyone it belonged to. The family gathered in April for what was meant to be an ordinary celebration, Daniel's 55th birthday, hosted at the house on the Oakline Drive, the cypress table set with its usual white candles, the whole extended family present, cousins and old friends filling the wraparound porch with easy laughter that had no idea what was coming. Rebecca waited until dessert, until the cake had been cut and the toast had been made, and Daniel sat at the head of the table looking pleased and a little sentimental, the way he always did on his birthday. Then she rose from her seat, and something in the way she stood, spine straight, chin lifted, a folder held against her chest like a shield, made the table's chatter fall away into an uneasy hush. "I want to say something," Rebecca began, and her voice, though quiet, carried to every corner of the porch. "This isn't the toast anyone was expecting. I'm sorry for that. I've thought about the right way to do this for weeks, and I don't think there is one, so I'm just going to say it." She looked at her husband. She looked at Claire, seated beside Andrew with a smile that hadn't yet caught up to the dread rising in her chest. And then Rebecca opened the folder and began to read, not everything, not every message, but enough. Dates, a hotel receipt, a photograph of 2 people standing too close in a parking garage, caught by a security camera Rebecca had, in the end, simply asked to see. The porch went utterly silent, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on a room like water. "Mom," Andrew started, half rising from his chair, his face draining of color as understanding arrived in pieces too large and terrible to hold at once. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Rebecca said, and for the first time her composure cracked just slightly, just enough to show the devastation underneath it. "I wanted to protect you from this. I've wanted that for weeks, but you deserve the truth more than you deserve my protection." Every eye at the table turned, some in confusion, some already understanding, toward Daniel and Claire, seated on opposite sides of the long cypress table that Daniel himself had built with his own hands the year his son was born. Daniel did not try to deny it. He sat very still for a long moment, and then he set down his fork with great care, as though it were the only steady thing left to hold on to, and he looked at his wife of 29 years, and then at his son, whose face had gone white and rigid with a devastation too large for words. "She's telling the truth," Daniel said quietly, "all of it." "Dad," Andrew's voice broke entirely. "This happened because of me." Daniel's voice was steady in a way that seemed to cost him everything he had left. "Don't blame her for this. Don't blame your mother for not telling you sooner, and don't you dare blame yourself for not seeing it. I built this. I betrayed my family. I betrayed the people I love most in this world, and there is no version of tonight where I get to explain that away. This is my failure, mine alone." Claire had gone very still, tears sliding silently down her face, unable to look at Andrew, unable to look at anyone. "Andrew, I'm so sorry, I never meant." "Don't," Andrew's voice cracked like a shot across the table. He was on his feet now, chair scraping back hard against the porch boards, his whole body shaking. "Don't you dare tell me what you meant. I don't want to hear it, not from you, not tonight." He looked once more around the table, at his mother's grief-stricken composure, at his father's ruined face, at Claire, who could not meet his eyes, and then he turned and walked into the dark beyond the porch lights, and no one followed him, because everyone understood in that terrible silent moment that there was nothing left to say that could undo what had already been done. What followed was not a single collapse, but a slow, grinding unraveling that touched every corner of the family's life. Andrew moved out of the apartment he and Claire had begun, quietly, to share, taking only what fit in his car, unable to be in a space that still smelled like her. He stopped answering his father's calls entirely, dozens of them, over the following weeks, each one going straight to voicemail, each voicemail left unheard. He told his closest friend, in the one conversation he allowed himself about it, that it wasn't only the affair that had broken something in him. It was that he no longer knew which parts of the last year had been real. Had his father's warmth toward Claire, all those family dinners, been genuine affection curdling slowly into something else, or had it been a lie from the very first handshake? He didn't know. He suspected he might never know, and that uncertainty was its own particular kind of grief. Rebecca and Daniel's marriage did not end that night, but it did not survive intact either. Rebecca asked him to move out within the week, unable to sit across the cypress table from him, unable to sleep beside a man whose absence in the bed now felt more honest than his presence had for months. She did not know in those early weeks whether this was the end of 29 years or simply the beginning of a longer, harder reckoning. She only knew she could not decide anything while her hands were still shaking. The extended family fractured along quiet, painful lines. Daniel's sister stopped speaking to him for a time, furious on Rebecca's behalf. Old friends who had known the family for decades found themselves awkwardly choosing sides at dinner parties, or simply withdrawing from both of them rather than choose at all. Andrew's cousin, who had been there the night of the birthday dinner, later admitted she still couldn't look at a cypress table without thinking of that porch, that silence, the sound of Andrew's chair scraping back. Claire disappeared from the family entirely, and within a month from the city. She sold what furniture she couldn't take with her, left her gallery representation behind, and moved 400 miles away to a small coastal town in North Carolina where no one knew her name or her history, taking only her paints and the particular, crushing guilt that followed her every mile of the drive. She told herself she was giving Andrew room to heal without her ghost hanging over every corner of Charleston. She told herself, on the harder nights, that she simply could not bear to keep living in the wreckage of what she'd caused. Nobody in the aftermath felt like they had won anything. There was no relief in the truth being out, no vindication sharp enough to outweigh the loss underneath it. There was only the long, quiet work of trying to figure out what, if anything, could be salvaged from a family that had trusted each other completely and had that trust broken from the inside. Months passed. Charleston moved through a humid summer and into a cooler autumn, and slowly, in fits and starts, the people at the center of that April night began the difficult, unglamorous work of putting themselves back together. Rebecca did not divorce Daniel, not immediately, though for a long time she could not have said with any confidence that she wouldn't. Instead, she did something harder. She insisted on time, months of it. She watched him, from a careful distance, go to therapy on his own without her having to ask twice. She watched him take responsibility in ways that didn't ask anything of her, no pleading, no minimizing, no quiet campaign to be forgiven faster than she was ready to forgive. He rented a small apartment downtown and did not, as far as she could discern, so much as look at another woman. He simply did the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone worth trusting again, without demanding credit for doing it. "I'm not asking you to decide anything," he told her one evening in late summer, the two of them sitting on opposite ends of a bench outside the old church he'd restored decades earlier, a building that had once represented the best of what he was capable of building. "I know what I broke. I know it might not be fixable. I just didn't want to spend these months pretending it was someone else's job to fix it." Rebecca had looked at him for a long time in the fading light. "I don't know if I can go back to what we had," she finally said. "I don't think we should," Daniel said quietly. "I don't think what we had is even available to us anymore. If there's anything left to build, it has to be something new. Something that knows what I'm capable of and chooses to stay anyway with open eyes. I don't get to ask for less than that. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was, Rebecca thought, driving home alone that night, the first honest thing he had said to her in a very long time, and honesty, however painful, was the only foundation she was willing to consider building on again. Andrew's healing took a different, harder shape. He threw himself into work for a while, the way people do when stillness feels unbearable, and it took a long time, longer than he expected, before the anger softened into something more complicated. Grief, mostly, for a relationship that had been real to him even if it had been built, unknown to him, over a fault line. He went to see his father exactly twice that summer, both times brief, both times mostly silent, both times ending with Andrew leaving before he was ready to say anything close to "I forgive you." But he kept the door open a crack, which was more than he'd thought himself capable of in April. He thought about Claire more than he wanted to admit, not always with anger. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about the woman who told him, on their very first conversation, that you have to let people see the thing you're embarrassed by, or you start believing your own highlight reel. And he wondered, with a complicated ache that never fully resolved, whether she had been talking about herself even then, whether some part of her had been trying, in her own oblique way, to warn him that she was not as simple as the version of herself she let him see. It was late October when Andrew finally found her. He hadn't set out to look, or that was what he told himself, though the truth was messier. A mutual friend from the gallery had mentioned, in passing, a little coastal town in North Carolina, a small shop that sold local art, a woman matching Claire's description who'd been seen there since the summer. Andrew had sat with that information for 3 weeks before he finally got in his car on a gray Saturday morning and drove north without fully deciding, until he was already halfway there, that this was a decision he'd made. The town was small and quiet, the kind of place where the ocean set the pace of everything, gulls wheeling low over gray water, a single main street lined with shops that closed early. He found the gallery 2 streets back from the water, a modest storefront hand-painted sign, the kind of place Claire would have dismissed 4 years ago as asterisk too small to matter and would now, he suspected, understand differently. She was inside, alone, arranging a new set of canvases along the back wall, her hair longer than he remembered, pulled back loosely, paint on her hands the way it always used to be. She looked thinner, quieter somehow, even standing still. When the bell over the door rang and she turned and saw him standing there, she went very pale and then very still, one hand pressed flat against the wall as though she needed it to stay upright. "Andrew," her voice was barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure I'd actually get out of the car," he admitted. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Outside, the gulls called over the water, and a bell somewhere down the street rang the hour, and the shop around them held very still, as though it too were waiting to see what would happen next. "How did you find me?" she finally asked. "Does it matter?" "No, I suppose not." She looked down at her paint-stained hands. "I think about the last time I saw your face more than I think about almost anything else. I've replayed that night so many times I could probably recite it word for word. I know that's not an apology. I don't think there is one big enough." "I didn't come for an apology." Andrew stepped further into the shop, looking around at the paintings, quieter work than what she used to do, softer colors, the ocean appearing again and again in different lights. "I came because I couldn't stop wondering if the person I fell in love with was real, or if I built her out of what I wanted to see." "She was real," Claire's voice cracked. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't excuse what I did, what I let myself become part of. But everything I felt for you was real, Andrew. It never stopped being real, even when I was doing something that made me unworthy of it." He was quiet for a long time, studying her face, the way grief and guilt had carved something new into it, softer at the edges than the confident woman who'd once told him not to believe his own highlight reel. "Do you still love me?" he asked finally, and his voice shook on the question in a way he hadn't expected. Claire's eyes filled, and for a moment she couldn't speak at all. When the words came, they came in a broken whisper. "I never stopped, not for a single day. I told myself I didn't deserve to, and I tried to bury it under everything I did to punish myself for what I'd done, but it never left. It's the truest thing I know." She crossed the small space between them slowly, giving him every chance to step back, the way his father had once given her every chance to stop him, except this time Andrew didn't step back. He let her come to him, and when she reached him, she rested her forehead against his, both of them trembling, both of them crying without quite meaning to, and for a long moment neither said anything at all, because there was nothing left that words could carry. "I'm not the same person who left Charleston," Claire whispered. "I don't know if that person deserves you. I don't know if I do, even now." "I'm not asking you to be the same person," Andrew said softly. "I don't think I'm the same person who let you go, either. Maybe that's the only way any of this makes sense, if we're not trying to go back to who we were." They stood like that for a long time, foreheads together, breathing each other in. Two people who had been broken by the same terrible night in different ways and had somehow, against every reasonable expectation, found their way back to the same small room. When they finally kissed, it was slow and careful, full of grief and forgiveness both at once, nothing like the desperate urgency of their first kiss years ago on the seawall, and nothing at all like the hurried, guilty kiss that had once broken everything apart. It was quieter than either of those, steadier, the kind of kiss that comes not from certainty but from two people choosing, deliberately with open eyes, to try again. "We can't change what happened," Andrew said finally, pulling back just far enough to look at her, his hands still cradling her face. "Nothing either of us does now undoes any of it. My parents may never fully recover from what your family started that night. I may carry pieces of this for the rest of my life." "I know," Claire whispered. "But maybe," Andrew said, "we can choose what happens next." Outside, the gulls wheeled over the gray water, and the bell down the street rang again, marking the hour, indifferent to the two people standing very still in the small gallery, holding on to each other and to the fragile, unfinished, entirely uncertain hope of a second chance. Not because the past had been erased, but because, at long last, both of them had decided it no longer had to be the only thing that defined what came after.